My name is Isabella Moretti, though most people call me Bella. I am 28 years old, and if you looked at me on the street, you'd probably think I was just another woman juggling coffee cups, grocery bags, and a restless toddler tugging at my sleeve. That image would be accurate, at least on the surface. What you wouldn't see, what I spend every day trying to hide, is the shadow of my last name. Moretti is not just a name, it's a brand, a warning, a dynasty. And the man behind it, my father, Don Moretti, is the kind of figure whose presence bends entire rooms, entire cities, into silence. I don't talk about him. Not at work, not with neighbors, not even in the mirror when I brush my teeth and try to pretend I'm living a normal life. It's not that I'm ashamed of who I am, though God knows there are days I feel like I am. It's that the only way I've managed to keep a sliver of peace for myself and for my daughter is by building walls around the truth. By day, I'm a junior editor at a small publishing house. My job is humble, but I cling to it with a desperation that surprises even me. I read manuscripts about love affairs in Paris, magical train journeys, and detectives who always get their man. My task is to polish sentences, fix grammar, trim the fat. It's honest work, and I like to believe that when I fix a clumsy phrase, I'm stitching order into the chaos of someone else's world. Maybe it's my way of atoning for the chaos I can't control in my own. And then there's my daughter, Sophia. She's 4 years old, a whirlwind disguised as a human child, with dark curls that refuse to be tamed and a giggle that can disarm even the sternest soul. Sophia is the reason I get up every morning. She's also the reason I collapse into bed every night like a soldier returning from the front lines. She asks questions about everything. Why the sky is blue, why pasta tastes better with cheese, why her grandfather never comes over for dinner like other children's grandfathers. That last question I sidestep with clumsy metaphors about busy men and different lives. One day, I know, she'll demand the truth. I'm dreading it. The day I met Daniel began like most others, late. Sophia had thrown a fit about wearing socks, and had spent 10 minutes arguing with her tiny stubborn feet before giving up. By the time I bundled her into the stroller, grabbed her lunchbox, my purse, and my sanity, I was already behind schedule. We stopped at a small caf/bookstore on the corner of my sanctuary, the one place that felt both public and private, where the smell of roasted coffee beans mixed with the must of old paperbacks. Sophia had been unusually quiet that morning, her eyes fixed on a stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere. I thought we might actually survive the coffee stop without incident. I was wrong. As I balanced my latte in one hand and tried to fish out coins for a scone with the other, Sophia squirmed free, darted forward, and collided directly with a man carrying his own coffee. It was like a small storm, liquid everywhere, a sharp gasp from the man, and my daughter standing in the middle of the wreckage, looking both guilty and defiant. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," I blurted, rushing forward with napkins that did nothing to stem the tidal wave of embarrassment flooding me. The man tall, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a streak of weariness that made him seem both approachable and untouchable, looked down at Sophia and then at me. To my surprise, he laughed. Not a mocking laugh, but a genuine warm sound that cracked open the tension like sunlight through a cloud. "It's fine," he said, crouching to Sophia's level. "I think your little one just wanted to make sure I wasn't too attached to this coffee." Sophia, emboldened by his easy tone, clutched her rabbit tighter and announced, "You shouldn't carry drinks so high. They fall." I wanted to sink into the floor. Instead, I mumbled apologies while the man waved them off, grabbing a handful of napkins himself. "That's Daniel Hayes," the barista whispered conspiratorially to me a few minutes later, as though his name alone should mean something. It didn't, Not then, but the syllables stuck in my mind. Daniel. We ended up sharing a small table because the calf was crowded, and Sophia had decided she liked him. She plopped a rabbit in front of him like an offering and demanded he tell it a story. Daniel didn't miss a beat. He spun a ridiculous tale about a rabbit who wanted to be an astronaut but was afraid of carrots because they reminded him of rockets. Sophia howled with laughter. I watched, somewhere between astonished and grateful, as this stranger dismantled my daughter's defenses in 10 minutes flat. We talked, awkwardly at first, then with growing ease. He told me he was a structural engineer, that he spent his days designing bridges and his nights trying not to burn pasta. I told him I worked with books, but left it at that, skipping over my last name like a stone over water. It struck me how ordinary he seemed. Not ordinary in a dull way, but in the kind of way that felt impossible in my world. He carried himself with a quiet steadiness, as though the ground beneath him had never trembled. I envied that. When we left, Sophia tugged my hand and whispered, "Hess nice. Can we see him again?" I didn't answer, but I caught myself glancing back through the window, watching Daniel gather his things, his head bent slightly as though deep in thought. I told myself it was nothing, just a chance encounter, a blip in the endless routine of single motherhood. But deep down, some small, stubborn part of me knew better. Because sometimes, the smallest collisions are the ones that change everything. For the next few days after that chaotic coffee spill, I tried to convince myself it had been nothing more than an amusing accident. People bump into each other all the time in a city as crowded as mine. We exchange apologies, maybe smiles, and then vanish back into our routines. That's how life is supposed to work. Clean, contained, forgettable. But Daniel Hayes proved difficult to forget. It wasn't just the way he handled the coffee disaster without a trace of irritation, or the way he stooped to speak to Sophia as if she were someone worth listening to. It was his steadiness, his ordinariness. That quality should have made him easy to let go, but instead it lodged in my chest like a splinter I couldn't ignore. Sophia, of course, had no such hesitation. Children, in their ruthless honesty, always expose what we try to hide. 2 days later, while I was brushing her hair into something that vaguely resembled pigtails, she asked, "When are we seeing the rabbit man again?" "The who?" I blinked, distracted by the way her curls refused to cooperate. "The man who told the rabbit story. The man who laughed at me when I spilled coffee." She crossed her arms, making her entire tiny body an exclamation point of certainty. "He's funny. I like him." I opened my mouth to deflect, then stopped. A part of me, the cautious part trained by years of secrecy, wanted to insist we wouldn't see him again. But another part, the weary, yearning part, whispered, "Why not?" So that Saturday, I found myself wandering back into the calf/bookstore under the flimsy pretense of needing a new notebook. Sophia, sensing my weakness, skipped beside me like she knew exactly what we were doing. He was there. Of course he was. Sitting at a corner table with a stack of papers spread around him, a pencil behind one ear, and a cup of black coffee cooling at his elbow. His brow furrowed in concentration, but his eyes softened when he looked up and saw us. "Bella, right?" he said, rising slightly from his chair. The sound of my name in his mouth startled me, not because of how he said it plain, casual, but because of how much it warmed me. "Yes," I answered, fighting a ridiculous urge to smooth my hair. "And this is Sophia, in case you forgot the little hurricane who nearly drowned you." Sophia beamed, clearly thrilled to be remembered. "Are you telling more rabbit stories?" Daniel chuckled, motioning us toward the empty chairs across from him. "Depends. Is the rabbit still afraid of carrots?" Sophia launched into an elaborate explanation about how her stuffed rabbit had bravely eaten half a carrot that morning, which in her mind was equivalent to conquering Everest. Daniel listened as though it were the most important news he'd ever received. I sat there, strangely disarmed. My life had been filled with men who wielded power like a weapon, men who puffed up their importance with every gesture, every word. But here was a man who leaned in to hear a child's nonsense about a rabbit. He wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't trying to be anything other than himself. That should have terrified me more than it did. We fell into conversation again, and this time it lasted longer. I learned Daniel's mother had died when he was 8, that he'd grown up with a father who worked 2 jobs and still somehow made time to build model bridges with him out of popsicle sticks. That was how his love of engineering began. Not with textbooks or professors, but with a kitchen table, glue, and imagination. He asked about my work, and I told him about the publishing house, though I skimmed over the details. Mostly, I fix other people's mistakes, I said lightly. Sounds noble, he replied. I make sure buildings don't collapse, and you make sure sentences don't. The simplicity of his observation made me laugh harder than I expected. It felt good to laugh. Too good. Almost dangerous. We started seeing each other at the caf more often. Sometimes it was planned and unspoken agreement, sealed by the way we lingered at closing time. Other times, it felt like coincidence, though I wondered if we both engineered those accidents on purpose. Sophia adored him. She'd tug at his sleeve and demand he draw rabbits for her. His sketches were awful, cartoon blobs with ears that looked more like antennas, but she cherished them like masterpieces. I caught myself watching the two of them together, a strange ache blooming in my chest. I hadn't let myself imagine this kind of life. Afternoons spent laughing over bad drawings, conversations that drifted from silly to serious, the possibility of something resembling normal. It felt like slipping into a warm bath after years of standing in the cold. Yet every time I started to relax, reality jabbed me. A black SUV parked too long outside the caf. A stranger at the counter whose eyes lingered on me a fraction too long. The invisible web of my father's influence stretched across the city, and I knew it was only a matter of time before those threads tightened. Daniel didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't comment. Maybe he thought I was simply cautious, the way single mothers often are. I wanted to keep it that way. One evening, after Sophia had finally collapsed into bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the glow of my phone. My father had called 3 times that day. I hadn't answered. His texts had been short, sharp. We need to talk. I knew what that meant. He never wanted to talk. He wanted to remind me who I belonged to, remind me of the world I could never fully escape. I set the phone down and closed my eyes, trying to breathe past the knot in my chest. What would Daniel think if he knew? Would he run? Would he look at me differently, the way so many others had? The thought of his expression, those kind eyes narrowing in suspicion, made my stomach twist. The next time we met, he noticed my distraction. You okay? He asked quietly, after Sophia darted off to browse picture books. I forced a smile. Just tired. He didn't push. He just nodded, offering me half his cookie, like it was the most natural gesture in the world. And for a brief, dangerous moment, I let myself believe I could hold this fragile, ordinary happiness without breaking it. There are moments in life that sneak up on you quietly, almost embarrassingly so. You expect fireworks when your world shifts, but often it's something as small as a crooked smile, or the way a hand brushes yours across a caf table. For me, the realization that Daniel Hayes had become part of my daily thoughts arrived on a rainy Wednesday, while I was folding tiny socks. Sophia had been running circles around the apartment all afternoon, turning the living room into her private obstacle course. My attempts to corral her had failed, so I surrendered, crouched on the rug, and sorted laundry. There's nothing quite as humbling as matching socks for a 4-year-old who owns more glitter patterns than any human should. And in the middle of that mindless domestic ritual, I found myself smiling at the memory of Daniel squinting at his own terrible rabbit sketch. It was dangerous, that smile. It meant he was slipping past my defenses. Later that week, we met again at the caf. Rain clung to the city in sheets, the windows fogged up with condensation, making the world outside blur into watercolor. Daniel was already there, laptop open, tapping away at something too complicated for me to follow. Sophia darted straight to him with the confidence of a child who decided she owns every adult within reach. "You promised the rabbit would go to the moon," she announced, thrusting her stuffed toy onto his keyboard. Daniel glanced at me, grinning, then solemnly closed his laptop. "Ah, yes. But first the rabbit needs a spaceship." Within minutes, napkins, straws, and sugar packets became the architectural plans for an interstellar mission. I watched them, marveling at how easily he made space for her in his world. My father, for all his wealth and power, had never sat down on the floor to play spaceship with me. Power was his language. Pretend was beneath him. "Do you always let her win?" I teased when Sophia squealed in triumph at her rabbit's imaginary launch. "Of course," Daniel said, mock serious. "It builds character. Or bad habits." He shrugged, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Some habits are worth having." I should have looked away, but I didn't. One evening, about a month after our first meeting, Daniel suggested something that made my chest tighten with both excitement and dread. "There's this park near the river," he said casually, sipping his coffee. "They have this ridiculous carousel with lights that make it look like a carnival from the 1950s. Sophia might like it. Want to go Saturday?" It sounded simple, ordinary, but in my world, nothing ever was. I hesitated, glancing at Sophia, who was already humming about flying horses. I thought of the black SUVs that sometimes idled outside our building, the men with sharp eyes who pretended not to watch. Could I risk it? "Sure," I heard myself say. That Saturday, the three of us walked through the park like any other small makeshift family. The carousel spun, with painted horses bobbing up and down, music box notes twinkling across the dusk. Sophia squealed as Daniel lifted her onto a white horse, steadying her with a gentle hand. I stood back for a moment, watching them, something twisting painfully in my chest. I could almost believe we were just a normal mother and daughter, with a normal man who liked us. Almost. When Sophia demanded I ride too, Daniel insisted on taking the horse next to mine. The ride jolted forward, the lights flickering in dizzy patterns. I laughed despite myself, hair whipping in the wind. Daniel leaned slightly toward me, his voice barely audible over the music. "You look happy," he said. I was, and it terrified me. After the carousel, we wandered along the river, Sophia skipping ahead. Daniel and I walked side by side, close enough that our arms brushed occasionally. Every touch sent sparks I tried to ignore. "Can I ask you something?" he said at last. "Depends," I answered cautiously. He smiled, but there was seriousness beneath it. "Why do I feel like you're always holding something back?" My throat tightened. He had noticed, of course he had. Daniel wasn't oblivious. He just wasn't the kind of man to press recklessly. "I'm a single mom," I said, buying time. "Holding back comes with the job description." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Just I like what I know so far. You don't have to tell me everything at once." The generosity in his words cracked something inside me. I wanted to confess right there, tell him about my father, the empire of fear behind my last name, the reason I sometimes flinched at shadows. But instead I tucked my hands into my pockets and smiled, because telling him the truth would mean risking this fragile, sweet connection. I wasn't ready. That night, after Sophia finally drifted to sleep, I stood by the window, watching rain beat against the glass. My phone buzzed again, another message from my father. Dinner, tomorrow. No excuses. The dread in my stomach settled like lead. He knew. He always knew. Maybe not about Daniel, not yet, but about the simple fact that I was living too freely, stepping outside the invisible boundaries he set. I closed the phone, heart pounding. Normal mothers worried about school forms and grocery budgets. I worried about whether the man I was starting to care for would survive if my father discovered him. But as I crawled into bed beside Sophia's warm little body, I clung to the memory of Daniel's voice by the river. I like what I know so far. It was a fragile hope, and hope, I'd learned, was the most dangerous habit of all. If falling for Daniel felt like drifting down a quiet river, then the first sign of real danger came on a night I had almost convinced myself we were safe. We'd gone out for pizza nothing fancy, just a corner place with checkered tablecloths and waiters who sang along to the jukebox. Sophia had declared herself the official cheese inspector and sprinkled Parmesan over everyone's slices, whether we wanted it or not. Daniel leaned back in his chair, laughing at her bossiness, and I couldn't stop staring at him. There was something disarming about the way he fit so easily into our tiny, chaotic bubble. For the length of that meal, I allowed myself to believe the fiction, that we were just 3 people enjoying greasy slices, that my last name wasn't Moretti, that no shadow stretched behind me. But when we stepped outside into the cool night air, I saw it. A black sedan parked across the street, the windows tinted so dark they could have been mirrors, but I knew better. I knew the subtle hum of an engine left running, the glint of a cigarette tip glowing faintly in the driver's seat. My stomach dropped. Daniel noticed my sudden stillness. Everything okay? Fine, I lied quickly, tugging Sophia's hand a little too tightly. Just cold. He offered me his jacket, a simple, thoughtless gesture that made my throat ache. I slipped it over my shoulders, its warmth both comforting and suffocating. The sedan didn't move as we walked down the block, but I felt its eyes on me the entire way. That night, after putting Sophia to bed, I stood in the kitchen staring at my phone. My father hadn't called, but the message was clear. We see you. I poured myself a glass of wine I didn't drink and sat at the table, wondering how long I could keep weaving this fragile double life. The next week, Daniel invited us to his apartment for dinner. I can't promise much, he warned, but I can guarantee at least one dish will be edible. Sophia was thrilled, bouncing around as if we were going to Disneyland. She carried her rabbit in a tiny backpack, just in case he gets hungry too. Daniel's place was modest, a one-bedroom with mismatched furniture and walls lined with books on engineering and travel guides, with dog-eared pages. It smelled faintly of basil and laundry detergent. For someone like me raised in opulence, I never asked, for it felt like stepping into another universe, a better one. Dinner was pasta, slightly overcooked but served with such earnest pride I nearly cried. Sophia declared it good, but not as good as pizza, and Daniel bowed as though she were a Michelin critic. Later, after Sophia fell asleep on the couch, under a borrowed blanket, Daniel and I stood in the kitchen, washing dishes shoulder to shoulder. Our hands brushed once, twice, until he finally turned and kissed me. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of kiss you see in movies with fireworks exploding overhead. It was soft, tentative, but it carried the weight of something real. For a moment, I forgot who I was, and then the sound shattered it, a knock at the door. Sharp, deliberate. Daniel frowned, drying his hands. Probably my neighbor. She always forgets her keys. But it wasn't his neighbor. When he opened the door, a man in a dark suit stood there, his face expressionless. Isabella, the man said, ignoring Daniel completely. Your father requests your presence. The air thickened. Daniel looked at me, confusion in his eyes. I felt my blood turn to ice. I'll call him tomorrow, I managed. The man shook his head once. Tonight. Daniel's brow furrowed. What is this? Who are you? The man's gaze flicked to him briefly, dismissively, before returning to me. Don Moretti does not like to be kept waiting. My name. My father's name. Out in the open, spilling into Daniel's small, safe apartment like poison gas. I forced a smile that felt like a mask glued to my face. It's fine, Daniel. I just need to go. He grabbed my arm gently as I reached for my coat. Bella, what's going on? My heart fractured under the weight of his question. I wanted to tell him everything. But Sophia stirred on the couch, murmuring in her sleep, and I knew I couldn't risk it not here, not now. Please, I whispered, my voice breaking. Trust me. I left with the man in the suit, my stomach knotted, my mind screaming. Daniel stood in the doorway, bewildered, his safe little world cracking open at the edges. The drive to my father's estate was silent, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. I sat rigid, rehearsing excuses I knew he wouldn't accept. When we arrived, the gates swung open like jaws. The mansion loomed ahead, all marble and menace, a monument to power. I hated it, hated the way its chandeliers sparkled like they had swallowed the stars, while outside, the streets bent to my father's will. He was waiting in his study, a glass of scotch in hand. His hair, more silver now than black, gleamed under the lamplight. His eyes sharp, assessing landed on me like knives. You've been careless, he said without preamble. I'm living my life, I countered, though my voice lacked conviction. You're playing house with a nobody, he swirled the scotch. Do you think I don't notice? Do you think the world doesn't notice? He's not nobody, I shot back, surprising even myself. He's what? Honest? Ordinary? Those words are worthless in our world. His tone cut like steel, and he will drag you down. I clenched my fists, my pulse hammering. Maybe I don't want your world. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. My father set the glass down with deliberate care. You will end this, he said softly, which was far more terrifying than if he'd shouted. I met his gaze, every muscle in my body trembling. No. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time in years I saw something flicker there. Not just anger, but fear. Fear of losing control. Then pray, he murmured, that this Daniel Hayes is stronger than he looks. I returned home past midnight, exhausted, shaken. Daniel's apartment was dark, but I knew the questions waiting in his eyes would not disappear. And I knew this was only the beginning. When I returned to Daniel's apartment, the hallway was dark, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Sophia slept curled on the couch, her little rabbit tucked under her chin. For one fragile moment, I thought maybe I'd slip back into the life I wanted. Pizza crusts, laughter, the warm weight of a child's head on my shoulder. But then Daniel stepped out from the kitchen, his face shadowed, his arms folded tightly across his chest. Who was that man, Bella? His voice wasn't angry, not yet. But it carried something worse, a sharp edge of betrayal. I opened my mouth, closed it again. The truth pressed against my lips, too big, too jagged to force out. A family matter, I whispered. Daniel stared at me like I'd slapped him. Family matter? That wasn't a neighbor asking for sugar. That was someone who knew your name, your father's name, and ordered you around like... He broke off, shaking his head. What's going on? I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to take his hand, press it to my chest, and let him feel how fast my heart was racing. But my feet stayed rooted, heavy with secrets. Please, I said softly. Not now. Not in front of Sophia. His eyes flicked to the sleeping child, then back to me. When, then? How long were you planning on keeping me in the dark? Forever? I swallowed hard. I wanted something normal. With you. I thought maybe if I pretended hard enough, I could have that. He let out a hollow laugh. Normal? Bella, nothing about what I just saw is normal. Sophia stirred on the couch, sighing, and we both froze. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. I should go, I murmured. Daniel stepped aside, his jaw clenched. I gathered Sophia in my arms, her small body limp with sleep, and walked out. I didn't dare look back. The next morning, my father's words echoed like a curse. Pray that this Daniel Hayes is stronger than he looks. I tried to bury myself in work at the publishing house, but even the most poorly written manuscript couldn't distract me. My phone buzzed with Daniel's name more than once, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What could I possibly say? Sorry. My father runs an empire built on fear, but please don't hold it against me. By evening, I gave in. I texted, "Can we talk?" We met at the park where the carousel lights glowed faintly against the dusk. Sophia raced to the horses again, blissfully unaware of the storm between us. Daniel and I sat on a bench, the music box melody twinkling like cruel irony. Bella, he said, his voice low, steady. I need the truth. I stared at my hands, twisting them in my lap. My father's warnings hissed in my ears. But so did Daniel's laugh, his kindness, the way he'd looked at Sophia, like she was the center of the universe. My father is not ordinary, I began carefully. He's powerful, dangerous. People in the city fear him. Daniel's jaw tightened. Dangerous how? I hesitated, then whispered the word that had defined my entire life. Mafia. He blinked, as if he hadn't heard me right. Mafia? Yes. My voice cracked. Don Moretti is my father. The silence that followed was unbearable. I felt naked, exposed. Daniel leaned back, his hand dragging over his face. Jesus, Bella. You let me sit across from you for weeks telling you about my stupid childhood bridges, and all that time. He trailed off, shaking his head. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew this would be your reaction. You were right. His laugh was bitter. You think I want any part of that? I've spent my whole life trying to be honest, decent. My father broke his back by working 2 jobs just to keep me away from this kind of world. I'm not asking you to be part of it, I said quickly. I just what? Pretend it doesn't exist? Pretend your last name isn't tied to violence and fear? His voice rose, and Sophia turned from the carousel, her little brow furrowed. I forced myself to smile at her, then lowered my voice. Daniel, please, I'm not my father. I just want a life outside of all that. He stared at me, conflict etched deep into his features. And what happens when he decides he doesn't approve of me? I couldn't answer, because I already knew. That night, I lay awake with Sophia's warm body curled beside me. My heart ached with the knowledge that I was losing him. Maybe I already had. But the next day, when Daniel showed up outside my office building, rain dripping from his hair, my chest nearly burst. I can't stop thinking about you, he said, his voice raw, even knowing what I know. But Bella, I need to understand what this means for us. I wanted to fling myself into his arms. Instead, I stood still, rain soaking through my coat, and whispered the only truth I could manage. It means loving me won't ever be simple. He studied me, rain streaking down his face, then reached out, brushing a wet curl from my cheek. Nothing worth it ever is. And in that fragile moment, under the gray sky, I let myself believe we still had a chance, even as I felt the ground beneath us begin to crack. The knock came late on a Sunday evening, just as Sophia and I were sprawled on the rug, building lopsided castles out of plastic blocks. The sound was sharp, deliberate, not the lazy tap of a neighbor borrowing sugar. I knew before I even opened the door. 2 men in suits stood there, impassive, shadows of a larger shadow. "Your father requests your presence," one said simply. My chest tightened. I glanced back at Sophia, who was busy crowning her block tower with a toy giraffe, oblivious. "I'll come," I said quietly, "but she stays here." They nodded. My life had always been full of unspoken rules, and one of them was this: children were off limits. For now. The drive to my father's mansion felt like being carried into the belly of some ancient beast. Every streetlight we passed seemed to flicker out behind us until we pulled through the wrought iron gates. The house loomed above, cold marble and sharp edges, too large for comfort, too heavy with secrets. Don Moretti was waiting in the great hall, flanked by oil paintings of dead ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow me. He wore his authority like a second skin. Tailored suit, polished shoes, a glass of red wine that looked more like blood in the low light. "Isabella," he greeted, his voice smooth as silk, dangerous as glass. "We need to talk." I folded my arms, forcing myself to stand tall. "About what?" "About the boy." I winced. "His name is Daniel." He ignored the correction. "Do you think I don't know where you go? Who you see, how you spend your evenings?" "I allow you your little freedoms, Bella, but this..." He set his glass down with a deliberate click. "This is not freedom. This is recklessness." "He's not reckless," I shot back, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "He's good. He's kind. Sophia adores him." His eyes narrowed. "And that's supposed to sway me? You think the affection of a child outweighs the honor of a family?" I felt the heat rise in my chest. Maybe it should. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. His gaze bored into me, a clash of wills across the marble floor. "You will end it," he said finally, each word sharp as a blade. "No." The word slipped out before I could stop it. My pulse thundered in my ears. His jaw tightened. "Isabella, I've done everything you ever asked of me. I married the man you chose, bore the consequences when it fell apart. I've raised Sophia under your watchful eye, lived in the cage you built. But I will not give up Daniel." My father leaned back, regarding me as though I were some unpredictable animal. For the first time in my life, I saw something flicker in his expression, not just fury, but disbelief. "You defy me," he murmured, almost to himself. "I choose for myself," I corrected. His fingers tapped against the arm of his chair, slow and deliberate. Then, perhaps Daniel Hayes should understand what it means to be with a Moretti. Cold dread settled in my stomach. "Leave him out of this. That is not for you to decide." When I returned home, Daniel was waiting outside my building, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, his expression a mixture of worry and resolve. "Bella," he said the moment he saw me, "we can't keep doing this half-truth dance. Either tell me what's happening, or..." He trailed off, but the weight of the unspoken, "or we end this," hung between us. I wanted to collapse into his arms, bury myself in his steadiness, but my father's threat rang in my ears. "My father doesn't want us together," I admitted. Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "No kidding. That was clear the moment those suits showed up at my door." "But what does that actually mean, Bella? Are we in danger?" "Yes." The honesty tasted bitter. "Anyone close to me is in danger. That's why I tried to keep you away." He studied me, his eyes softening despite the tension in his voice. "And yet, here I am." Something inside me cracked. "I'm scared," I whispered. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. So am I. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. Tears stung my eyes, and I let them fall. For once, I didn't hide. The next day, Sophia drew a picture at preschool. 3 figures holding hands under a crooked sun. When I picked her up, she proudly shoved it into my hands. "It's you, me, and Daniel," she explained. "We're a family." I stared at the shaky crayon lines until my vision blurred. A family. The word was both a promise and a threat. I tucked the drawing into my purse, silently vowing I wouldn't let my father tear it apart, even if it meant standing against him for the first time in my life. That night, as Sophia slept, I sat by the window, staring at the city's skyline. The streets glimmered with possibility, but in the shadows, my father's empire pulsed like a heartbeat. Daniel wanted honesty. My father wanted obedience. And I was caught between them, a daughter, a mother, and now, dangerously, a woman in love. I never thought I would kneel before my father again. Not after the last time, years ago, when he forced me into a marriage I hadn't wanted and called it duty. But love, messy, terrifying love, has a way of making you strip yourself bare. It was a Tuesday night when I drove up to the Moretti estate, Sophia safe at home with a trusted babysitter. The gates groaned open like the jaws of some ancient beast, and I felt myself swallowed all over again. The study smelled of tobacco and old leather. My father sat in his chair, a chessboard spread before him, though no opponent was in sight. He moved a knight forward, slowly, deliberately, as if anticipating my arrival. "Bella," he said without looking up, "twice in 1 week. To what do I owe the honor?" I took a deep breath. My knees felt weak, but my voice held. "I'm here to ask you for something." "Ask?" He chuckled, finally meeting my gaze. "You know how I feel about that boy. About what you're doing. There is nothing to ask. I'm not a child anymore." My words trembled, but I pressed on. "I've lived your life. I've carried your burdens. But Daniel?" My throat tightened. He makes me feel alive again. He makes Sophia laugh like she has a father. The room went still. My father's expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. "You would compare him to her father?" His tone was icy. "I would say he's more of a father to her in 1 month than Marco ever was in years." Silence. Then the sharp crack of his hand slamming against the table. The knight toppled over, rolling across the polished wood. "Enough." His voice cut like a blade. "You think love excuses weakness? You think kindness makes a man strong enough to protect you? To protect my granddaughter?" I forced myself to stand tall, even as my knees shook. "Then test him. If you're so sure he's unworthy, prove it. Give him a chance to show you who he is. If he fails, it'll end it. But if he passes..." My voice faltered, then steadied. "If he passes, you leave us alone." My father stared at me, disbelief flickering across his face. "You would gamble your happiness on this man's courage?" "I already have." For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, he leaned back, folding his hands under his chin. "You want me to test him?" His lips curved in something between amusement and menace. "Do you realize what you're asking, Isabella?" "Yes." My voice cracked, but I didn't look away. I'd rather risk everything than live half a life. He studied me with that predator gaze I knew too well. Then he smiled slow, calculating. "Very well. If Daniel Hayes wishes to love my daughter, let him prove he can survive in my world." My stomach dropped. "What kind of test?" "That," he said, rising to refill his glass of scotch, "is for me to decide." When I returned home, Daniel was waiting outside my building again. His patience both comforted and shattered me. You've been with him, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes. My voice trembled. I asked him to test you. Daniel's eyes widened. Test me? Bella, what the hell does that mean? It means he won't back off unless you prove yourself. Prove myself? His laugh was bitter, incredulous. Bella, I'm not some gangster. I design bridges. I pay my taxes. I don't know how to prove myself to a mafia boss. Tears stung my eyes. I know, but he would never accept you otherwise. And I can't lose you, Daniel. Not like this. He stared at me, his jaw tight, his eyes clouded with fear and frustration. Finally, he exhaled. Tell me what I have to do. My heart lurched. Daniel. No, he interrupted, his voice steady despite the storm behind it. I don't understand this world, Bella. I don't want to. But if proving myself means I get to keep Sophia, then I'll face whatever test he throws at me. I closed my eyes, fighting tears, and whispered the only truth I had left. I don't deserve you. He touched my cheek, gentle and unflinching, then let me decide that. That night, as Sophia slept between us, clutching her rabbit, I lay awake in the dark. Fear pressed heavy against my chest, but beneath it flickered something even more dangerous. Hope. Because Daniel had said yes. And now, everything rested on whether he could survive my father's game. The summons came 2 days later. A black envelope slid under my apartment door while Sophia napped in the bedroom. No knock, no sound of retreating footsteps, just the envelope, heavy with menace. Inside was a single card with my father's seal pressed in wax, and one line scrawled in his precise handwriting. Saturday, midnight, warehouse on Pier 17. Bring him. I stared at it until the letters blurred, my breath shallow. It was happening. When Daniel came over that evening, I showed him the note. He read it twice, his jaw tightening. So this is it, he murmured. Yes, I whispered. You don't have to. He cut me off, shaking his head. Bella, if I walk away now, your father wins. And I lose you. I can't. Tears stung my eyes. Hell make it dangerous. Then I'll be careful. The simplicity of his answer undid me. He didn't understand what dangerous meant in my father's world. And yet, maybe that innocence was his greatest strength. Saturday night arrived too quickly. Sophia was asleep at a neighbor's apartment, blissfully unaware. My stomach twisted as I rode in the back of a black sedan with Daniel beside me. He held my hand, squeezing it once in reassurance, though his own palms were clammy. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking skeleton of rusted metal and broken windows, lit only by the glow of a few overhead lamps. My father stood waiting, flanked by men in suits, whose eyes gave nothing away. Mr. Hayes, he greeted smoothly, as though they were meeting for afternoon tea instead of a trial. Welcome. Daniel straightened his shoulders, his chin lifting. What do you want from me? My father's smile was slow, predatory. A simple task. One of our shipments has been intercepted. I want you to bring it back. Daniel blinked. I'm not. You are not mafia. Yes, I know. My father waved a hand dismissively. But you claim to be a man worthy of my daughter, worthy of her child. Then show me you can protect them. The world is not kind, Mr. Hayes. It takes. It demands. What will you give back? 2 men wheeled forward a large crate. My father tapped it with one finger. Inside is merchandise that belongs to me. Someone will try to take it from you before morning. Deliver it to the address on this paper. He handed Daniel a folded slip. Do that, and perhaps I will reconsider. Daniel glanced at me, panic flickering across his face. I wanted to scream, to beg my father to stop, but I held my tongue. This was the bargain I had made. I'll do it, Daniel said finally, his voice steady, though I could see the tremor in his hands. My father's smile widened. Good. Let us see if honesty can survive the night. The crate was loaded into a van. Daniel drove, knuckles white against the steering wheel, while I sat beside him, my heart hammering. "What's in the box?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "And you don't want to." He nodded grimly. "Then I'll just focus on keeping it safe." For the next hour, we wound through the city's darkened streets, neon signs flickering over puddled pavement. Every set of headlights in the rear view made me tense. Daniel kept glancing at me, his jaw tight. "Bella," he said finally, "I don't know if I can do this." "You can," I said fiercely, surprising even myself. "Because you're not like them. You're better. And that's exactly why he needs to see you succeed." Daniel exhaled, gripping the wheel tighter. We were halfway across the river bridge when it happened. A car swerved into our lane, forcing Daniel to brake hard. Two men jumped out, masks pulled over their faces. "Stay in the van," Daniel ordered, voice hoarse. He climbed out before I could stop him. My chest seized. This was it. My father's test had teeth. The men advanced, shouting demands for the crate. Daniel stood in front of the van, no weapon, just his body blocking the way. "Walk away," he said, his voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "This isn't yours." They laughed, circling him like wolves. One lunged forward, shoving him. Daniel stumbled but didn't move aside. "Bella, run!" he shouted over his shoulder. "I couldn't, my legs wouldn't move." They shoved him again, harder, but he planted his feet. His hands were up, defensive but not violent. "I'm not letting you take it," he said, louder this time, something fierce burning in his voice. "I don't care who you work for. I don't care what's inside. I promised her I'd protect it, and I will." Something in his tone, desperate, unwavering, gave them pause. One of the men muttered something in Italian, then spat on the ground. They backed off, retreating to their car. Tires screeched as they sped away into the night. Daniel staggered back to the driver's seat, his chest heaving. "Are you okay?" I gasped, clutching his arm. He nodded, sweat slick on his brow. "Let's finish this." By dawn, the crate sat safely in the hands of my father's men at the designated address. Daniel's clothes were rumpled, his hair damp with sweat, but he held his head high. My father studied him for a long moment, then turned to me. He didn't run. "No," I said, pride swelling in my chest. "He didn't." My father's gaze lingered on Daniel, unreadable. Then, with the faintest nod, he dismissed us. On the drive home, Daniel gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles whitened again. "I thought I was going to die," he admitted, voice raw. "But the only thing I could think about was you. You and Sophia." Tears filled my eyes. "That's why you passed." He glanced at me, confusion written across his features. "Passed?" I squeezed his hand. "You don't realize it, but tonight you showed him more strength than all his men with guns ever could." Daniel let out a shaky laugh, tears glinting in his own eyes. "Bella, I don't want to be part of his world." "You won't," I promised, clinging to his hand. "You'll be part of mine." And for the first time, I believed it. The call came the next evening. No note, no messenger this time, just my father's voice on the other end of the line, smooth and sharp as a blade. "Bring him to me," he said. "Tonight." The words left no room for argument. I hung up, my hands trembling. Daniel, sitting at my kitchen table with Sophia on his lap, looked up immediately. "It's him, isn't it?" "Yes," I whispered. "He wants to see you." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. He kissed the top of Sophia's head, then gently set her down. "Then let's go." The mansion seemed colder that night, its marble halls echoing with menace. My father waited in the great dining room, seated at the head of a long polished table. The room smelled of cigars and old wine, the chandeliers throwing fractured light across the walls. Daniel walked in beside me, Shoulders squared, steps steady. I could see the tension in his jaw, but he didn't falter. "Mr. Hayes," my father greeted, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Sit." Daniel sat. I hovered at his side, my fingers twisting together. "You impressed me last night," my father said, pouring himself a glass of wine. "Most men would have run." "You didn't." Daniel's eyes flicked to mine, then back to him. "I wasn't going to let her down." My father chuckled, low and dangerous. "Ah, love. Such a fragile motivator. It makes men brave until it makes them foolish." Daniel's voice was steady. "Or maybe it makes them human." The room went quiet. My father leaned back, studying him as though Daniel were a puzzle he intended to solve. "You know who I am. You know what I command. Do you understand what it means to be tied to this family? To my daughter?" "Yes," Daniel said simply. "And you still want her?" "Yes." My father's lips curved in something between amusement and disbelief. "Why? When you could have an easier life elsewhere, without shadows, without enemies?" Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "Because I love her. And because Sophia deserves to grow up knowing what it feels like to be safe, not just protected." There's a difference. The air shifted. Even I drew a breath at his words. My father tapped his glass against the table. "Safe. Protected. Those are luxuries bought with power, Mr. Hayes. Power you will never have." "Maybe not," Daniel said quietly. "But power isn't the same as respect. And it isn't the same as love. I don't want to be you. I don't want your empire. I just want her." Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. My father's eyes burned into his, and for the first time I wondered if Daniel had gone too far. Then my father laughed. Not a warm laugh, but sharp, startled, as if something about Daniel's audacity had unsettled him. "You are either a fool or a very brave man," he said. "Maybe both," Daniel replied. I reached under the table and gripped his hand, both terrified and in awe of him. After what felt like hours, my father stood. "I will not bless this union," he said, his voice low, "but neither will I forbid it. You may keep her, if you can. But know this, the world will not forgive you for loving her, and neither will my enemies." Daniel rose to his feet, meeting his gaze. "Then let them come. It'll still be here." For a fleeting second, I saw something flicker in my father's eyes, not approval, not acceptance, but a grudging respect. "Go," he said finally, "before I change my mind." We left the mansion in silence, the night air cool against my skin. I didn't breathe until the gates closed behind us. In the car, Daniel finally spoke. "He'll never like me." "No," I admitted, "but he might learn to live with you." Daniel reached for my hand, his grip firm. "As long as you can." I turned to him, tears spilling freely. "I can." That night, as Sophia slept between us, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight with a mixture of fear and fragile joy. We had survived the test. We had faced my father. But I knew this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a different kind of war, one fought not with guns or blood, but with love, resilience, and the quiet defiance of choosing happiness in a world built on fear. The uneasy peace lasted less than a week. For a few stolen days, we lived as though nothing had happened. Walks in the park, with Sophia chasing pigeons, late-night dinners in Daniel's small kitchen, quiet mornings where his hand brushed mine over coffee mugs. But beneath it all pulsed the truth. My father's silence was never mercy. It was strategy. The call came on a Thursday evening. My father's voice was calm. Too calm. "Dinner. Tomorrow. You and Mr. Hayes. Non-negotiable." I almost dropped the phone. When I told Daniel, he only nodded, though his jaw clenched tight. So now we're invited as a couple. Invited, I said bitterly, like lambs to the slaughter. The dining room glowed with golden chandeliers the next night, the long table set as if for a feast. But the food sat untouched, more decoration than nourishment. My father was at the head, of course, flanked by his lieutenants, silent, watchful men, who might as well have been statues carved from stone. Daniel and I sat side by side. Sophia was mercifully not included. I thank God for that. My father raised his glass but didn't drink. His gaze cut straight through us. "You have passed one test," he said, his voice even. But that was survival. Tonight is about choice. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" My father's smile was thin. "You stand at a crossroads, Mr. Hayes. You may remain with my daughter and child. But if you do, you will always live under my shadow. My enemies will know your name. My world will touch yours, whether you want it or not." He set the glass down, the crystal ringing like a warning bell. "Or you can leave. Walk away now, and I will ensure you live a long, quiet life. No harm will come to you, but you will never see Isabella again." My breath caught. "Papa." Silence. His tone snapped across the room like a whip. "This is not your choice, Isabella. It is his." Daniel's hand found mine under the table, gripping tight. His knuckles were white. I could feel his heart pounding in his palm, as if he were holding a live wire. He didn't speak right away. The silence stretched until I thought I might scream. Finally, he said, his voice low but firm, "I'm not leaving." My father's eyes narrowed. "Think carefully. You are not built for this world." "Then I'll build my own," Daniel replied. "With her, with Sophia. I don't need your empire. I don't need your approval. But I'm not walking away." The table went deathly still. My father studied him with a gaze that had broken stronger men. I held my breath, my pulse a drumbeat in my ears. At last, my father chuckled, shaking his head. "Fool, maybe," Daniel admitted, "but I'd rather be a fool who loves her than a coward who left." Something shifted in the air, then not surrender, not blessing, but a grudging recognition. For the first time, my father looked at Daniel not as a nuisance, but as a man. He rose, adjusting his suit. "Very well, you have chosen. But do not mistake my tolerance for acceptance. My world will come for you, whether I will it or not. If you falter, if you fail her, you will answer to me." Daniel's voice was steady. "I won't fail her." We left the mansion in silence, my father's warning echoing in my ears. In the car, Daniel exhaled, his hand still gripping mine. "That was it, wasn't it? The final ultimatum." "Yes," I whispered. "And you chose me." He turned to me then, his eyes tired but fierce. "I'll always choose you." The words cracked something open inside me, and for the first time in years I let myself sob freely, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of love. That night, as Sophia slept curled between us, I watched her small chest rise and fall, her fingers still clutching her rabbit. Daniel's arm was around me, his breath steady against my hair. My father had tried to break us apart. Instead, he had forced Daniel to prove just how unbreakable he was. But even as I lay there, safe in Daniel's embrace, I knew the storm was far from over. My father's enemies would come. His world would bleed into ours. And yet, for the first time, I didn't care. Because Daniel had made his choice, and so had I. For the first time in years, mornings felt almost ordinary. Sophia would pad into my room at dawn, her curls tangled, her rabbit dragging by one ear. Daniel, already awake, would greet her with exaggerated yawns and pretend he'd been waiting all night for her to deliver the day's weather forecast. She'd climb into the bed between us, declare it sunny with a chance of pancakes, and that was how we'd begin. Laughter, warmth, the smell of coffee and burnt batter wafting from the kitchen. I cherished those mornings, the way a starving person cherishes crumbs. They weren't perfect. Daniel had a habit of overcooking eggs. Sophia refused to eat crusts, but they were ours. And in their imperfection, I found something resembling peace. Yet peace is fragile, always threaded with cracks. One afternoon, we took Sophia to the botanical gardens. She darted between rose bushes, her giggles carrying across the manicured lawns. Daniel walked beside me, his hand brushing mine with casual certainty, as though it had always belonged there. "This feels surreal," he admitted, watching Sophia chase butterflies. "Like I'm living someone else's life." "Good surreal or bad?" I asked. "Good," he said quickly. Then his eyes darkened. "Except for the part where I keep wondering who's watching us." I followed his gaze. At the far end of the path, a man in a suit lingered by a fountain. Too still, too precise. Not one of my father's men I knew their faces. A rival? A spy? Or simply paranoia made flesh? I squeezed Daniel's hand. "Ignore it, just for today." He didn't argue, but the tension in his jaw told me he couldn't. That night, after Sophia was asleep, Daniel sat at my kitchen table with his head in his hands. I poured him tea, though it went untouched. "I'm trying, Bella," he said quietly. "I'm trying to live in this world of yours, but every time I think I can, something reminds me how close danger really is." "I know." My throat tightened. "I hate it. I hate that loving me means carrying this weight." He looked up, his eyes raw. "I don't regret loving you. Not for a second. But I need to know, will it ever get better? Or is this just forever?" I sat beside him, reaching for his hand. "Maybe it won't ever be normal, but maybe we can carve something out of the chaos. Something just for us." He exhaled, then nodded slowly. "Then that's enough." The following weekend, Daniel suggested we take Sophia to his father's house. It was the first time he had invited me into his past. His father's home was modest, tucked on a quiet street lined with maple trees. The man himself greeted us at the door. Silver hair, calloused hands, eyes that softened instantly when they fell on his son. "This must be Bella," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "And the little one." He bent down, offering Sophia a lollipop, with such grandfatherly ease it nearly broke me. We spent the afternoon there, listening to stories of Daniel as a boy, building rickety bridges from popsicle sticks, sneaking cookies before dinner, once getting his head stuck between the banisters of the staircase. Sophia laughed so hard she nearly fell off her chair. It was simple. It was normal. And that normalcy was a gift I hadn't realized I craved until it was in front of me. On the drive home, Sophia fell asleep in the back seat, her rabbit clutched tight. Daniel reached over, threading his fingers through mine. "See?" he whispered. "We can have this." Tears pricked my eyes. Yes, we can. But the shadow always finds its way back. The next morning, a bouquet of lilies was left outside my door. No note, no card, just flowers. Ordinary to anyone else, but to me, they carried a message. Lilies were the flowers my father sent whenever he wanted to remind me of my place. Beautiful, fragrant, and laced with warning. Daniel found them first. He frowned, holding the bouquet out to me. "These from your dad?" I nodded, my stomach sinking. "What does it mean?" "It means he's watching," I whispered. "Always." Daniel set the flowers down on the counter with deliberate force, then let him watch. He doesn't get to decide how we live. I wanted to believe him, desperately. But as Sophia skipped into the kitchen asking for pancakes, all I could see was the shadow of lilies stretching across our tiny, fragile world. That night, lying awake, I thought about the future. Could we survive like this, caught between the light of our love and the darkness of my father's empire? Could Daniel's strength, Sophia's innocence, and my stubborn hope be enough to outlast the world closing in? I didn't know. But as Daniel's arm curled around me and Sophia murmured in her sleep, I realized I no longer cared about the answer. What mattered was this. We had today. We had each other. And for now, that was enough. Some endings don't arrive with fireworks. They don't crash down with finality or explode in clarity. They arrive quietly, like dawn creeping into a room, washing everything in pale light until you realize the night is over. For me, the end began on a Tuesday morning. Ordinary, almost laughably so. I was making toast while Sophia colored at the table, her tongue poking out in concentration as she sketched what she swore was a horse, but looked suspiciously like a potato with legs. Daniel sat across from her, sipping coffee, pretending to critique her drawing with the seriousness of an art historian. "Clearly a masterpiece," he declared. "It's a unicorn," Sophia corrected, rolling her eyes. "Ah, of course, I see it now. Very avant-garde." Her giggle filled the kitchen, high and bright, and in that moment, butter knife in my hand, the smell of burnt toast in the air, my daughter's laughter echoing off the walls, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. It wasn't perfect. The lilies on the counter reminded me that my father's gaze was still fixed on us. The shadows hadn't retreated. They never would. But inside this small apartment, with Daniel's steady presence and Sophia's relentless joy, I realized I didn't need perfection. I just needed this. Later that day, I visited my father, alone. The study was the same as always. Heavy curtains, the smell of smoke, the faint tick of the grandfather clock. He didn't look up when I entered. "You've chosen your path," he said, moving a pawn across the chessboard. "Yes," I replied, "and I'll live with the consequences." He finally raised his gaze, studying me. "You've grown, Isabella." It wasn't praise. It wasn't approval. But it wasn't condemnation either. "I don't expect you to understand," I said softly, "but I need you to accept that this is my life, my choice." For a long moment, we stared at each other, a lifetime of battles compressed into silence. Then, with a sigh, he leaned back in his chair. "You're your mother's daughter," he murmured. Stubborn to the end. Something flickered in his eyes, then not surrender, not warmth, but a weary acknowledgement. It was the closest I would ever get to acceptance, and it was enough. That night, I curled into bed beside Daniel. Sophia nestled between us with her rabbit clutched tight. "Do you think hell ever really let us be?" Daniel asked quietly. "No," I admitted, "but maybe he doesn't have to. Maybe we don't need his blessing. Maybe we just need to keep choosing each other." Daniel nodded, pressing his lips to my temple. "Then we will. Every day." I closed my eyes, letting the rhythm of Sophia's breathing soothe me. The city outside buzzed with life cars honking, sirens wailing, voices rising and falling in the night. A city built on chaos, shadows, and secrets. But here, in this small room, in this fragile circle of love, I felt something stronger than fear. Hope. Not the naive kind I once clung to, but a tempered, resilient hope. The kind born from scars, from battles fought and survived. Tomorrow, there would be more challenges, more shadows, more reckonings. But tomorrow could wait. Tonight I had Daniel's hand in mine, Sophia's laughter still ringing in my ears, and the quiet certainty that for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. And that was enough.